Welcome back to another episode of Multiplatform Madness on the Sega Saturn. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at 14 more multi-platform games, ranging in genres from puzzle games, to racing games, to platform games. We're covering a lot of stuff here. Let's get started. Mid-1998 would bring about the infamous Sega Saturn port of Dracula X Nocturne in the Moonlight, otherwise known as Castlevania Symphony of the Night. I have made it perfectly clear in past videos about my dissatisfaction of the quality of this port. It didn't use any of the Saturn's 2D power, and was a simple port of the PS1 assets and engine. I'm not going to repeat that rant, and instead, I'm going to talk about this game in a positive light. This is, after all, at its center, still one of the best 2D games ever made. The Saturn port here had a bunch of extras added to make it distinctive. We get a bunch of new music, an extra playable character, all the playable characters playable from the start, as well as 2 new areas to explore in the castle, as well as new boss battles. There were also a few gameplay enhancements, such as a 3rd equipable item for healing and potions, as well as a number of new items in the game. Often referred to as a Metroidvania, this style of game essentially drops you into a world with nothing but a basic attack and the ability to navigate the terrain. As you play and explore your surroundings, you come across new weapons, armor, spells, and various other items to help you along the way. You'll level up as you defeat enemies as well, increasing your stats to help you survive increasingly difficult challenges. The game excels in its exploration mechanics, as some areas cannot be reached until you have procured the right item or skill, making backtracking an essential part of the game. Boss battles range from simple encounters with easily dispatched foes, to screen-filling terrors that will decimate you without the proper gear or weapon. Graphically, despite its status as a gross disappointment to many Saturn fans, the game still looks great most of the time, with only some unsightly mesh transparencies mucking up the works. The art design remains as good as it ever was, and the animation and overall presentation are absolutely timeless. Gameplay remains solid most of the time as well, with bouts of slowdown usually just a mild nuisance. There are times where the slowdown becomes a hindrance to gameplay, but it's never game-breaking, and usually only certain areas of the game are affected by it. Overall, this port has a bunch of technical issues it never should have had, given how powerful the Saturn is at moving around graphics like this. But the game is still fantastic in its content, and the playability is still well ahead of many other games on the system. There is no reality in which this port will ever be forgiven for its technical failings, but taken fully at face value, the question ultimately boils down to this: is this still a good game? The answer is no, it's not a good game. It's still a great game. Right around the halfway point in 1996, Electronic Arts would drop a port of the 3DO classic Rash on the Sega Saturn. Full disclosure, this is absolutely one of my favorite racing games of all time, so prepare yourselves accordingly. The goal of this one is simple: get to the finish line first by any means necessary. That means punching and kicking other racers, and even running down pedestrians if need be. There is no high ground in Road Rash. You're here to win, and nothing is going to stop you. I adore the atmosphere this game has. The soundtrack is pure 90s goodness, and sets a tone and atmosphere that makes you feel like you're part of a club of racing gods that have no fear whatsoever. The full motion video cinemas that cover the wrecks, arrests, celebrations, and failures all fit this feeling of being part of this world perfectly. Even the crazy psychedelic art style fits in, and brings about a visceral quality that links it to feeling real or possible. The Saturn port here looks and runs great, and is my favorite version of this game by far. The scaling sprites all look as they should, and the game has a fast, smooth frame rate that makes the gameplay an absolute joy to behold. The game is hard though, and levels 4 and 5 will absolutely kick you square in the balls the first time you get there. This adds tons of replay value though, especially if a loss comes at the hands of another racer causing you to wreck. The revenge factor runs deep, and it'll drive you to keep trying until you've exacted your reckoning. Best part of Road Rash is that it's still cheap, so there's no excuse to not owning this 32-bit classic. Right around the Road Rash release, Electronic Arts would also give us a port of another 3DO classic, Need for Speed. The original game had a ton of problems, including feeling slow, a sluggish frame rate, and some rather limited content in regards to the tracks. Luckily, this Saturn version is based upon the PC release of the game, with added tracks, a better interface, vastly superior graphics presentation, and a smoother frame rate. You have various ways to play the game. A standard time trial mode, a one-on-one race with Mr. X, and a full grid race against other cars. Speaking of Mr. X, this is the antagonist of the game, the trash talker who berates you as being his inferior, complete with scenes that show him gloating and criticizing your driving skills. You'll get tired of this guy fast, especially since the game is hard as hell in the beginning, and it'll be a few races before you see any success. The graphics in this one is on par with the PS1 release, a rare thing for ports on the Saturn. Everything from draw distances, frame rate, and textures are all represented here well, and even the race music is quite enjoyable. Gameplay feels heavy and a tad unresponsive at first, but once you get used to them, you'll be zipping around the tracks in no time. If you're looking for the Japanese release of this game, you need to look at Nissan Presents Overdriving GTR, a heavily modified version of this game, with all new cars, new cinemas, and even the gameplay feels different. So much so, in fact, I consider them both worth owning. Luckily, both games are cheap, so again, there is no reason to not own this racing legend. Early 1997 would see the release of Hexon, published by GT Interactive. This is the sequel to the PC game Heretic, and is based upon the Doom engine with added RPG elements. Firing this one up for the first time reveals a game much better tailored to the Saturn's hardware than the Doom port the Saturn received the same year. While not always perfect, Hexon's frame rate is far more playable than in the Saturn's Doom port, a curious outcome considering both games used the same style engine and they both came out on top of one another and were published by the same company. Hexon also excels at being different enough from Doom to justify its existence. This isn't simply a mindless blastathon, and you'll need your wits about you to have any success. This one is extremely trap and puzzle heavy, making you stop to consider the layout of the level and what it's asking you to do. You even have the ability to travel between places you've already been, where something you did in one area affected another. You also get the choice of 3 playable classes here, each with various traits and qualities that change the way you need to play them. Overall, Hexon is a fairly solid port of the PC release, and is close enough that it's worthy of consideration. There were 2 Sega Ages memorial selections on the Saturn, with Volume 1 being released in early 1997 by Sega. It included 4 games from Sega's arcade catalog going back as far as the late 1970s. The first game was Head On, an ultra-simplistic game where you race around a track collecting dots, trying to avoid a murderous AI opponent hell-bent on crashing into you. You'll play this one for a minute or two before the asinine concept runs you away. The second game on the disc, Pingo, is far more playable. You'll push blocks of ice around in an effort to kill enemies and survive. It actually is quite fun and challenging for a game this old. The third game is Up and Down, a curious capture the flag racing game that has you jumping around a track to avoid enemy vehicles. This one is fun and challenging as well, but the irritating soundtrack and quickly ramping difficulty will limit your playtime. The last game on the disc needs little introduction if you were a fan of the Genesis or Mega Drive. Flicky here is one of Sega's most recognizable early arcade releases, and has you trying to save small birds from ravenous predators. The gameplay in this one is quite fun, and it's the best game on the disc by far. Sega Ages Memorial Selection 2 would see release by Sega later that same year. It includes 6 games this time around. The first game here is Samurai, an early arcade release that pits you in an arena against multiple foes. Gameplay is surprisingly deep for such an old game, with the ability to block certain attacks, but you'll be done quickly with this one due to its difficulty and repetitive nature. The second game is Monaco GP. This racing classic should be fairly familiar to Sega fans, and it still plays good today in small bursts. You basically are just avoiding other race cars as they try to take you out. The third game is Starjacker, an early Sega shoot 'em up that plays fair and reminds me of an overhead Zaxxon. Again, the repetitive nature of the gameplay will limit your playtime, but it's not a bad game at all. Next up we have Sindbad Mystery. Here you collect question marks in various stages to reveal a treasure map, trying to avoid the enemy as you go. You have a few environmental items to help kill those enemies, but they also can block your path and prevent your escape. It's another fair game that you'll spend a few minutes playing. Next on the list is Doki Doki Penguin Land, another one instantly recognizable by longtime Sega devotees. Here you have to get your egg to the bottom of the stage without it being broken. Enemies will of course do everything in their power to stop you, and you'll need patience to get past them. This has some of the best replayability on these discs, and is great fun. Our last game is Ninja Princess, the original Sega Ninja. Master System fans will instantly recognize this one, as it's the original code for the Sega classic, The Ninja. This one is a vertically scrolling action shooter that pits your ninja skills against endless waves of enemies. This one is highly playable and hard as well, and is worth the price of the disc alone. I really enjoyed these 2 discs as a trip down memory lane, and they both have a game or 2 on them still worth returning to more than once. They also aren't crazy expensive, so give them a look if any of them were in your childhood. ReadySoft would bring out its full motion video effort Brain Dead 13 on the Saturn in late 1996. These guys did the Sega CD ports of Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, so it's no surprise their next effort was a full motion video adventure. Here we see our hero Lance accidentally learn of a nefarious plot to take over the world by the evil Dr. Nero Neurosis. You must now escape his castle and avoid being killed by the Doctor's henchman, the Deadly Fritz. This one is slightly different from past full motion video adventures, as you have the ability to choose your path as you play, even backtracking across areas if you wish. The animation is awesome considering it doesn't use the video card add-on, and is full screen to boot. It does suffer from various compression problems, but all in all it's a good looking game. You'll quickly become frustrated with this one though, as the deaths come hard and fast, with trial and error your only option for progression. The game isn't impossible though, and you have endless continues to get it right. If you have fondness for full motion video games, this one has the charm and atmosphere of games like Dragon's Lair. To the rest of you, it's a reminder of why these games never survived the 1990s. Micro Cabin of Mystaria and Savaki fame would bring us the unique puzzle/fighting game Noon in early 1998. This is one of the Saturn's more underappreciated multi-platform games, and few even know it exists. Set up arena style, it has the rather innovative gameplay in which it mixes a fighter, a puzzler, and an action game all in one. You have free movement in the level, where you must line up light-colored balls and hit them to create noons, which drops bombs on your opponent's grid. If you get too many bombs on your grid, a countdown timer begins, and you must get these bombs off your grid as soon as possible. You also have the ability to physically attack your opponent to send him out of an area, or prevent him from scoring a noon. Your defensive tactics range from squishing bombs to clear them, or special moves you collect in the field that allows various forms of attack and scoring. The game is complicated as hell when you first fire it up, but after a few matches you'll get the hang of it. Noon is frantic with 2 players, but shines in its 4-player mode even more. Here the game is pure chaos, and you'll need to be aggressive to stay in the fight. The graphics are solid with great animation and color, and the soundtrack is freaking epic as well, with tunes easily worthy of ripping to your phone. Noon's complexity and difficulty will turn many away, but give the game a shot. It's a class of puzzle games for people who normally don't like the genre. The Saturn would get a port of Crazy Ivan from Psygnosis in late 1996. This mech first-person shooter is standard fare for the genre. Hop in your mech, roam around and shoot things. It's pretty much that simple. The Saturn port here is notably scaled back from the PS1 release, with a draw distance right on top of you and uglier textures. The game does play smoothly, however, and for those of you wanting to blow things up, you could do a lot worse than this. It was never released in North America, only seeing the light of day in Europe and Japan. The game is extremely cheap though, so if you want to try it out for yourself, there's little stopping you. Since we did a few 3DO ports already in the episode, let's go ahead and do the Horde, released in early 1996 by Crystal Dynamics. This isometric turn-based strategy game starts out with some cheesy full-motion video of Kirk Cameron saving a king, and being granted the deed to a land overrun by murderous creatures known as Hordelings. These little bastards show up at the end of each turn, with the single-minded focus of tearing down everything you've built and killing your people. Each turn gives you a chance to build defenses and prepare for the coming attack, ending with the Horde making a run at your land where you have a chance to help defend it in real-time combat. Along the way you have a chance to buy upgrades and items to help you defend yourself better, as well as hire guys to help you fight. The Horde is a simple-looking game graphically. There is nothing here impressive beyond the animation of you and the enemies, but there is also nothing broken or distracting. It's a fairly fun game with a high difficulty curve, so the replay value is there if you have the patience. To those interested, the Japanese version is quite playable with minimal fuss, and is super cheap to obtain. We would also see Electronic Arts bring us the Bullfrog classic Magic Carpet in early 1996. This strategy-heavy first-person shooter plays similar to other Bullfrog games, with the added mechanics of 3D movement and real-time combat. As the title suggests, you are a mage flying around on your magic carpet, doing battle with various enemies and beasts trying to destroy you. You'll need to set up a home base, where your airship will collect mana from your fallen enemies. As the game progresses, enemies become more aggressive, attacking your bases and airship in an attempt to collect your resources. You'll gain spells and abilities along the way to better defend yourself as well. While this game suffers from a close draw-in, its frame rate is overall very playable, and for a Go Anywhere 3D engine, that was a rare thing on the Sega Saturn. The game is still quite good for those looking for something outside of the 2D shooter and fighter genres, and it's fairly inexpensive to boot. No, Magic Carpet isn't the best looking or playing Saturn experience, but overall it's got enough to warrant a purchase. Again in early 1996, we would get ShellShocked from Core Design. This tank combat game would be fast and arcade heavy on the gameplay mechanics, making it easy to pick up and play. Your mission is to stop terrorists in various levels. You'll encounter other tanks, bases, helicopters, and armored vehicles trying to destroy you. The graphics engine here is super smooth, and while it does have some pop-in, I enjoyed its overall presentation. The band of colorful characters gives it some personality, and the story isn't overly ridiculous. It's a really easy combat game to get into, and for the meager amount it sells for, I have no trouble recommending it. Spot Goes to Hollywood was released on the Saturn in early 1997 by Virgin Interactive. I am not a fan of this isometric platformer, and found playing it here absolutely dreadful. The gameplay feels awful, and I had a ton of trouble landing exactly where I wanted to at times, causing countless deaths and frustration. A platformer needs exact and easy to use controls to be fun. All of the challenge should be in the level design, not fumbling with poor gameplay mechanics. The game also doesn't look the part of a 32-bit platformer, with graphics that don't go much further than they did on the Genesis. You get more color, sure, but where are the special effects? Where's the wow factor pushing you through the stage to see what's next? If you're a fan of this game, I respect your opinion, but for me, this game is terribly dull, with piss-poor gameplay that gives you little reason to push on to see anything past the first level. It's not worth the time to press the order button to even buy the thing. Our last game, Tunnel B1, was ported by Microcabin and released in early 1997 by Ocean and Acclaim. This hover tank first-person shooter sets the player in a series of deadly tunnels, trying to escape mounted guns, tanks, and flying machines trying to destroy you. You'll need to navigate and open new tunnels as you progress, and gain new weapons and items to help you along the way. The graphics here are smooth, but lack the better-looking transparencies and light sourcing of the PS1 release. The game also has a weird viewpoint that makes it look like you are angled upwards, which results in the gameplay feeling awkward. There's nothing here terrible or broken, but the game does lack a compelling reason to keep playing. It fails to hook the player early, despite the game being easily picked up and played. I wouldn't drop it onto any of the best of lists for the Saturn to be sure, but if you think you might like shooting things up, Tunnel B1 is cheap all day long. I'd like to take a moment and talk about Dracula X for the Sega Saturn. I've never owned a game in my life that has made me feel such incredibly mixed emotions about whether that game is good or not. I mean, how can you help but not be disappointed in the technical aspects of that game? The slowdown, the transparencies, the overall lack of polish in a game that the Saturn should have just chewed up and spit out with no problem at all. But also, how can you not love Castlevania Symphony of the Night? The game still has all the great music and art that the original had. The gameplay is still there. The game in and of itself is still highly playable and one of the best games on the system. Wow, man, does a game like that just blow your mind as to you want to hate it one minute and you can't help but to love it the next. But anyway, what did you guys think of these other ports on the Saturn? Did you like any of them? Did any of them interest you? Let me know down in the comments and we'll talk about it. I am Sega Lord X, and I will catch you next time.